What I was actually wondering a lot about was this culture of blaming nurses. So I don't know, do you have any ideas or what are your thoughts about how this could change actually? What do we need to do? I mean, this seems like a very socio-technical question, right? How can we as researchers and designers maybe help here?
Well, it's an absolute scandal. It's something that Harold Thimbleby has been bashing his head against for a number of years, and so have other people doing safety usability research. Harold's father unfortunately died in an accident involving an infusion pump, and so he's made this a personal mission. He's even been elected an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in recognition of his work. The problem is that the regulatory mechanisms in most countries are captured most of the time by the drug makers and medical device makers. There has been some advance in Europe with amendments to the medical devices directives which came into force last year. And in the USA, Kevin Fu, a security researcher, got appointed as an assistant director at the FDA, and he's been trying to make some changes there. That's one of the things that's come in with the Biden administration. So an interesting thing that Kevin pointed out is that the FDA were happy for years with infusion pumps that were just killing people when this was just a safety thing. But as soon as it became a security thing, as soon as it turned out that one of the pumps was vulnerable to an attack over Wi-Fi that would let the attacker get into the hospital network, they pulled that pump's license. And when a pacemaker, the St. Jude pacemaker, turned out to be vulnerable to an over-the-air cyber attack, they mandated the replacement of 450,000 of them. And, there you're talking real money, because replacing somebody's pacemakers and, an outpatient surgical procedure, you go into hospital, they cut open your shoulder where the pacemaker is, they put in a new one, the cardiologist is standing by in case you have a heart attack. It costs thousands of dollars every time they do that. And so to replace 500,000 of those cost the healthcare system over $1 billion. So there are beginning to be the incentives to do stuff. However, from the point of view of a big teaching hospital such as ours, infusion pump accidents might be killing 6 or 7 people a year. So it's going to be about number 40 on the list of causes of patient death. So it never gets high enough up on the list for the medical director to start getting really worried about it. It is an issue. And the fact that it's convenient to blame nurses when things go wrong, of course, means that given the nature of power in society and sexism and so on and so forth, that there's even less incentive to fix stuff. On the other hand, if you've got a plane crash, the pilot is first on the scene of the accident, but he's usually a white guy who's known to the other pilots, and so that has much more social impact on the airline than blaming a nurse for a medical device failure.
I was wondering, you talked about those big companies whose interests are not probably aligned with what customers really want and need, and then you also have lawmakers on the other side, and they might be slacking behind. I would be interested in what, in your opinion, what is the role of academia in this triangle? What contribution can we make to make progress in terms of bettering dark patterns in the future?
Well, our job is basically finding out the facts, understanding what's going on, which has got a number of aspects to it. First, you've got to go and collect the data. You've got to understand the scale of a particular harm. And second, you've got to understand the mechanisms. If you're going to be any useful at lobbying on policy issues, you have to understand things like regulatory capture and how they work, and where there might be some points of pressure where you can make a difference. Because otherwise you can end up burning yourself out, complaining about something that is never going to be fixed because, big companies have got it sewn up.
So there is one more question from on Slack, which is, for the problem of robust versus fragile machine learning models, what do you
what would you propose to solve this? Training the ML model for identifying adversarial input in addition to the original classification could double training time.
Well, exactly. This is the problem. Up until now, machine learning researchers have aimed at doing the security within the machine learning model itself. And that, of course, means trying to do something like making it robust. So you think up all the adversarial examples that you can, and the gradient descent gives you a way to generate lots and lots of them. And you then train the model to not be fooled by that particular thing. But this is basically a fool's errand, because as Adi Shamir and others have pointed out, a simple counting argument tells you that there are always going to be adversarial samples, right? The deep learning models are so big, they've got so many dimensions, and the decision boundaries are so convoluted that there's always going to be some relatively close adversarial point. So what we proposed was what we call the taboo trap. And the basic idea here is that, if you have a kid, you train the kid to have beautiful manners and never use bad language, and then you send the kid off to school age 5 or 6 or whatever, depending on which country you're in. And by the end of the week, your kid is using language that would make its grandmother blush, right? Because it has broken taboos because it's been exposed to adversarial samples in the playground. And so our idea was that if you train a machine learning model so that certain outputs, certain bad words, if you like, and certain intermediate values, certain bad thoughts are not permitted, then whenever any of these are encountered, you know that the model has encountered something outside its training set. And so the idea here is that instead of making the thing robust, you make it fragile, and you make it fragile in a way that you can key, because different instances of your model can be trained to avoid different taboos. And this means that if you're someone like Bosch, who is selling machine vision to Mercedes and BMW and Ford and everybody else, you can sell different versions of your machine vision system so that an attack on one is not an attack on all the others. You can diversify the space so that you don't get any break once, run anywhere attack. So this is one of the things that we played around with. And if you look at my website or Google for taboo trap, you can see what we come up with. Now, this is only one of a large number of possible things. The bigger picture is that if you're doing safety engineering, or for that matter, security engineering, this is about the tools and processes and techniques that you need in order to protect whole systems end to end and to adapt to them as their environment evolves. So if you've got a system such as a car that's got a component such as a machine vision system in your automatic lane keeping module, then you've got to figure out all the ways in which this can go wrong and how you're going to compensate for that, not within the ALKS system itself, but within the car as a whole. Now, if you're building an autonomous vehicle, you're likely to have multiple sensors. You won't just be using, the one video camera in each automatic lane keeping system in the wing mirrors. You're also going to have forward-looking video cameras. You may have LiDAR. You will quite possibly have radar. You'll have ultrasonics. You will probably have something like, a synthetic aperture GPS. You know where you are within 80 centimeters. And it is the engineering task is then to say, there's a weird input coming from ALKS. This could be an equipment failure, or it could be an adversarial attack, and we'll deal with it in the following way. Okay, so the safety or the security is an emergent property of the whole system, and I think it's fundamentally misguided to try and put it all into every single component, because that's just not the way to do it right.
My question is related to the situation awareness you just mentioned. In human factors, we know situation awareness is critical for the physical safety. Right now, you brought this topic to the security and the privacy online. So I want to hear from you and maybe some of your comments and insights, how we can, afford individuals this security and the privacy situation awareness. For example, in the autonomous driving situation, because we know human attention or their information processing have been, attracted to physical safety, but at the same time, we want them to pay attention to the cybersecurity and privacy. So how we can, trade off those different aspects here.
Well, you raised a number of things there. What are you specifically interested in? Autonomous driving?
Yes, like discuss in the autonomous driving setting. Yeah.
Okay, well, about 25 years ago, I was the expert on tachograph security for Britain's Ministry of Transport. These are the devices that record drivers' time and distance, because we were replacing an old paper-based system with a new digital system, and we wanted to figure out everything that would go wrong. So one of the things that I learned there is that about half of all road traffic accidents on the freeway, which kill people, and about a third of the fatal road traffic accidents elsewhere are a result of people falling asleep at the wheel. These statistics aren't usually collected by police forces, but if you look at a sample of accidents, and you look at the accidents where somebody hit into a tree, at 50 miles an hour and there were no brake marks ahead of the tree, then if it was 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning, you could reckon they fell asleep at the wheel. So you would expect that a modern car, a Tesla, for example, an autopilot with adaptive cruise control, automatic emergency braking, and automatic lane keeping would save a lot of lives, right? Because that 50% of crashes that occur from people falling asleep at the wheel would mostly no longer be fatal, right? You fall asleep at the wheel, your car beeps a bit, and then it slows down. So what's not to like? Well, a couple of years ago, Tesla put some figures into NHTSA, the National Highways Transportation Safety Administration, saying that the rate of fatal accidents had been lower when people had autopilot switched on. And then one of Tesla's competitors got their lab to reanalyze the figures and say, no, it had actually been higher. So we're wondering what's going on here. A very small increase, or even a slight, a small decrease or a small increase in the number of fatal accidents. That's not what we expected. And we thought it might be to do with the risk thermostat, with people taking less care when they think they're safer. And what it now turns out to be is, we believe this, but it's about the difficulty of handing over from an autopilot to a human pilot or a human driver. Because the FAA found in tests many years ago that if your autopilot fails suddenly in mid-flight, it takes the flight crew about 8 seconds to get control of the aircraft. And what's happening in a car like a Tesla, if the Tesla gets confused, it suddenly says, you take over, beep. And it just assumes that the driver is able to grab the wheel instantly and steer. And what happens in a tragic number of cases is the car gets confused and it says, you take over, beep, and a second later, you smack into a truck and you're killed, right? And it is completely unrealistic to hope for a human driver, even someone who isn't watching a movie, right? Even somebody who's paying attention, to grab hold of the wheel on 1 second's notice and drive safely when the car has become confused. So there's a growing concern about this. There's a growing literature about it. And some of the more responsible car makers like Volvo have decided that they won't go to the next level of automatic driver assistance until they're confident that they can get the car to slow down at the edge of the road and stop of its own accord in the event that it becomes disoriented. But the problem with that is the tests they have to pass say that in order to pass this test, you have to be able to stop the car while staying in lane if you become confused. And the problem there is very often cars become confused about what lane there is because of things like roadworks. So this is an immensely difficult engineering problem once you start looking at it in detail. And so my thesis advisor, the late Roger Needham, always used to advise that good research comes from real problems. And if you want to make progress in this kind of field, I think the thing to do is to find some particular application that interests you and study it carefully and learn all the engineering details, learn the contextual details, figure out what the accident statistics are, talk to people in the industry. Because if you're working with real problems rather than with sort of blackboard problems, you're much more likely to discover interesting stuff.
Thank you very much.